Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of About Time, the start of series two. So, brand new series, but the same theme, where I'm fortunate to be having conversations with people who have inspired and influenced me over the years. And I'm delighted today for this episode to have two people. Edward Peck, who is Vice Chancellor of NTU and about to move on, and I'm sure he'll say more about that in a minute, and Philippa Hardman, who many of you will know is my co-founder and close colleague in GameShift. So welcome both. I'm delighted you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Philippa,
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you very much. The reason we're here is to talk about what was a pivotal piece of work in the work Philippa and I have done together. We created within Ashridge long ago something called participative strategy as a field, and developed lots of ways of working with that. And at the time we started working with NTU, it was the largest participative strategy project we'd worked on, and it became an important story to us. I mean, Philippa, do you want to say something about it and how it came about?
So I think, Edward, we first became involved in Nottingham Trent University very soon after you became Vice Chancellor there. And memory says that you were then People Director. Francesca Fowler contacted Chris, actually, because she had read about, we'd written various things about participative strategy. You had come in, you had obviously talked about your ambitions for the way you wanted to do the first piece of strategy work at NTU, and she had heard our names and contacted us. And that's, I think, was it? Do you remember it differently from your end?
Not at all. In fact, I was throwing out my cupboards because, as Chris said, I'm moving on shortly. And I found the original agenda for our meeting with you and Chris, Francesca and I, at the Holiday Inn in Bristol.
I remember that.
We talked a lot about the strategy process, and we came up with what were then the three strategic themes that we thought we'd base all the participative activities around, which have ended up now being 6 themes. But those 3 original themes have survived the last 11 years. So we obviously got something right from the outset.
Gosh, that's amazing. Can you remember what those themes were?
Yes, I'm surprised you can't, Philippa.
I could give a fair punt at it.
They're a creating opportunity, valuing ideas, and enriching society.
Yeah, and particularly enriching society actually really strikes me when I think about Nottingham Trent and all the work you've done, and also in the next strategy process that you undertook, because I think really impressive to me is the amount of work that's been done by NTU around taking people who wouldn't otherwise go to university, and really thinking about how can we bring people in to this strategy process, and through this strategy process about people who otherwise might never get to university. I know we might be jumping about, but that really strikes me.
And it's worth remembering also that when we finally came up with the strategy 12 months later, we had 2 additional themes that had come out of the process, which were connecting globally and empowering people, which was about how we relate to each other in the organisation. So even the themes were enhanced during the course of engagement with colleagues at the institution.
Yeah. But Philippa, before you jump in, I would just like to go right back to before that meeting, before the meeting in Bristol, and just why did you decide to do it this way at all? Why participative strategy?
Because my background is in mental health services management in the NHS. And my specialism was the creation of community mental health services, partly funded and facilitated by the closure of the old Victorian asylums. And to do that, you had to mobilise new voices into the strategy process. Otherwise, the voices of the dominant professions, typically in those days psychiatrists, would mean that many options that would drive the sorts of services and frameworks that users and other professional staff would want to see would never really get heard. Participative strategy I've been doing since the early 1990s. And even then it was designed to be disruptive, because it was trying to privilege the voices of those people who were the most dispossessed and marginalized, both because they were psychiatric patients, but also because many of them were living for long periods of time in remote psychiatric institutions. So I've been doing it for quite some time. So when I came to an institution which I was responsible for as the chief executive, I went back to what I knew, which is if you're going to have disruptive change, you have to engage the people who have the best insight into how that change could be designed. In this case, it was colleagues, it was students, and to some extent, it was external stakeholders. So it wasn't the same, but the motivation for how this could drive something that's very different to what had been seen before around strategy development goes back in quite a long way in my personal history. We established the first ever patients' councils in a UK hospital. We created the first advocacy schemes in psychiatric hospitals in the UK. And ironically, I learned how to do that in Nottingham. So it's really odd that, well, 30 years later, I was back in Nottingham with a different sort of participative strategy, but rooted in the same assumptions about how you achieve change.
And can I ask, Edward, because I guess one of the things that, you know, has always struck me is you came in as a very new VC and you spoke to us and you said, I want to do this work, and Francesca had found us, so to speak, for you to speak to. And I'm imagining that through the application process and the appointment process, you had been asked, so what is your strategy for NTU? Where do you see the organization being in 5 years? And you must have had an answer to that. And I suppose I've always wondered, how much did, after the first iteration of the strategy, so after those first 9 to 12 months, what emerged? How close was that to what had been, if you like, in one of your answers that I imagine was part of the appointment process?
Well, I can't remember that at all. I don't remember my appointments process. If I think back to what the answer would look like, it would probably be that I wanted the institution to be more confident. I wanted to be clearer in what it thought it was collectively trying to achieve. And I would want it to own the steps that it had to take to deliver on that ambition. But it wouldn't go any further than that, because my view of strategy is that, and increasingly so actually, is that it's not a plan. And what you're talking about is a plan. I didn't have a plan. I had a view about how strategy could be, and I had a view about the sorts of things in broad terms that we need to achieve. And of course, from my point of view, the process is as important as the product. So if the process built a sense of confidence, ambition, and gave people agency that if they engaged, expressed their views, something would change, was part of remodeling and rethinking how a university, how NTU in particular, could be.
And I remember also that one of the things that emerged from the process we created together, particularly around colleagues, was that we got all sorts of people who'd never met before, and physically it was at the time in rooms, you know, things like Zoom didn't exist. But we got people together in rooms about 30 to 40 at a time. And I remember you were really clear that professional services and academic people must be mixed. And that actually, as part of the process, that in itself was an intervention because people were getting to know each other. Did you have any resistance about that, or people not wanting to participate in that? Because obviously we facilitated those sessions, but
surprisingly not, no, actually. I think people, by the time the work started, I'd already given my state of the university address I did 4 sessions in one day. And I mapped out what I thought were the real strengths of the institution, but also where we could and should do better. And I think people were very realistic and open to a conversation about how the future could be an improvement on what they'd done that fast. If there was resistance, it was people just not bothering to sign up and attend. But that's fairly passive. And it was pretty much swept away by those people who did sign up and did attend. And the momentum, this was serious and authentic, and their voices are being heard and make a difference, really started to gain momentum. I presume some people didn't think this is how the world should be done, left the organisation. But no, I didn't pick up any overt resistance at all.
Yeah, because I remember those conversations in the room, and there really being I think people were also really encouraged by, they genuinely believed that their voices were being heard. And I think one of the things that we did around the framing of it was always about you being invited to contribute. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you get a vote on what happens. This needs to go back to the university executive and then to governors. But I think people did genuinely, and increasingly as the process went on, see that, oh, actually, they are listening to whoever they are, you, the exec. But I think there was a sense of people being heard, and therefore people, kind of the word spread.
Yes, I think that's right. And subsequently, particularly when people who were there were talking to people who weren't there, the scale of the engagement of colleagues had expanded well beyond what was actually the case. It's like all the people who went to see the Sex Pistols in Manchester couldn't have fitted into the Manchester Arena, let alone the little club they were playing in. There was a bit of that about it, that the talking about it and the retelling of it became almost mythical. It wasn't mythical, it actually happened, but it had a degree of breadth that actually it probably didn't have. And that was particularly the case the second time around, when we did something very similar again. It's even more the case now than it was in the first time around, that people talk about this as being almost like everybody in the institution was involved, which is patently obviously couldn't be true. But it also goes back to the power of the story. So that's the story I tell. It was an inclusive, participative process. And what I've learned about organisations, if you tell the same story often enough, people are minded to believe it, particularly if they think it's a good story and it's based in some reality and it seems to have made a positive difference to the organisation. They will tell that story, and that becomes a virtuous circle.
Yes, and I think, Edward, they're responding to the nature of the invitation, which was open. So even if they didn't play any big role, they felt invited, which became part of the story. That's
fair, Chris. In fact, in the second time round, there were some very big, weren't there, events? Well, there were hundreds of people there. So that's why it was bigger the second time, and the myth became even stronger that everyone had been involved. When you're right, Chris, they'd all been invited.
Yeah, well,
I think. Sorry, carry on.
No, I was going to say, Philippa, I have a memory of, and maybe we're going to tell the same story, of that event at Clifton campus where there was, there were only so many people that could be fitted in, and there was way more. So there was a bold decision taken, which was to run it more than once and just make sure anybody who wanted to come could come. And it was brilliant.
Remember that an invitation, so this is the second strategy, and I remember your I don't know, instruction, your ambition was for it to be bigger, for it to involve more people, and I'll come on to that in a second. But in terms of staff, it was to engage with more staff. And I remember there was this idea we had, we were working with Geraldine Harrison amongst other of your colleagues, and there was this collective idea that there should be an all staff, or all staff should be invited to a conference, if you like, a working conference, taking what we'd done in the focus groups before, but even bigger, and to show stuff and share stuff and just have a huge conversation in the room again, pre-COVID, no Zoom. And so every single member of staff was invited, from the most senior to the most junior. And I remember Geraldine saying, we've got a real problem. The biggest space we have on campus that we can have this is 150 people. And that includes, where we can get people in. But actually, we've got 300 people who want to come, and we're planning to run this once. So if we do this once, we're going to disappoint as many people. So, I mean, it was the best part of 8% of the staff who wanted to come. We're going to disappoint and, potentially piss off as many people as we accept. And then that was that sort of, oh my God, what do we do? And then it was, okay, let's have 300 people come, and we found an even bigger space on campus somehow. The events people really worked hard, and we couldn't even get, at the bit where everybody was milling around together, couldn't even get them to get seats. And then for the bits where we broke out, into smaller groups, the smaller groups were still about 60 people. And I remember one of the things that has never left me from that is that two of the cleaners wanted to come, and you were absolutely, we did a whole thing around really mixing people, again, and we worked really hard to make sure that although people were mixed, in order to make them feel comfortable, because it was quite a different kind of thing for them to join in with, they were in the same group, and when we did the group conversations, and it was fantastic. And I remember you being really proud that actually, some of the cleaners wanted to come and participate in the conversation. I don't know if you remember more about it.
I do remember that. I remember that. What I particularly remember is by that stage, because I've been at NTU for 5 years, I was much more confident about my role in the organisation. And my favourite book is Against Method by a man called Paul Hardman. And I remember in some of the short remarks I made, reading out, I think it's rules for people trying to achieve change. And one of Paul Hardman's rules is, the only rule that does not inhibit genuine change is anything goes. And there was a bit of a spirit of that, wasn't it, really? That people were genuinely invited to contribute ideas that were on their minds without any sense of pre-filtering or judgment. As long as they meant them, they were in the room to be heard, really. And in both strategies, some of the framing of it looks a bit odd, and it's a bit odd because they were words that were used by people that you said these things have been said, and I didn't see any reason to change them, even though they weren't in any sense organisational talk. They were what people said, and that therefore when the final strategy came out, it's very few words. The words were real words, mostly people had said.
Yeah, and we talked quite a lot about the colleagues who were involved. And I remember I said near the beginning about something that I'd really admired was around the social mobility ambitions of NTU. And I can't remember how the first engagement with Mansfield came about, but I remember facilitating. It wasn't planned at the beginning of the process. I remember something happened and you asking, and I think I was available, I came and facilitated the very first meeting. We went to Mansfield, which involved politicians and people from the FE College.
That was something completely different. So just because you have a strategy doesn't mean say you've got a plan. The idea of doing something in Mansfield came up in about 2018, and what you're talking about, I think it was 2018 actually, Philippa, was a stakeholder conference, as you say, where we gave the ownership of it to District Council, though we largely organised it and ran it. The fundamental question was, what would it take? What does Mansfield want from Nottingham Trent University? And the answer was, we want you to turn it into a university town. And we said, okay, we'll now go away and work with you to do that. And of course, the subsequent 6 years, we did. But there was nothing about that in the strategy. There were things about, we will help people transform their lives through education. We'll create opportunity above and beyond expectation. Above and beyond expectation, by the way, was borrowed from Disney. If you ever watch a Disney film, the advert always says, above and beyond your imagination. So we went for above and beyond your expectations.
Didn't know that.
So that was somebody else said that to me. You should use this phraseology. Anyway, so that was just something that was a sort of sideline that came out as a direction of travel of the strategy, but it wasn't in the words. And that's why you don't need many words, because if you have a plan, you think you've got to stick to the plan, and doing something in Mansfield was not part of the plan. In fact, there never really was a plan for Mansfield. It was just a series of activities that grew and grew and grew until now, 7 years later, Mansfield thinks about itself as being a university town.
Yeah, and it's interesting because my memory of it is that it was part of the strategy process, because the timing's about right, and that it was simply evolved as part of the, this is a possibility that we should explore and take up, and
But if you look at the next strategy, which we did the year after 2019, there's no mention of Mansfield in there either, because we don't talk about the stuff with that degree of specificity.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, no,
it arose mid almost towards the end of the first strategy cycle, because it was just the right thing to do.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
other important thing about that is it's about telling a story. So the story about Mansfield's quite interesting. It goes like this. We think we're good at sociability, at driving people to enable them to help change their lives through education. Up the road is one of the towns that has the lowest rate of sociability in the country. That's not our responsibility, but we feel we could do something about it, and therefore we're going to open a university campus in Mansfield. That basically was it. That was the business case. And it all came from that. And my view is the more you try and write things down and describe what you're going to do, the more you constrain people. Because actually, it's stuff that's happened in Mansfield, much of which was never written down. Largely, I find out about it retrospectively. But people have just done what they do, previously in Nottingham, now in Mansfield, because that's what they do. And, it drives sociability. And there's some stuff they haven't done elsewhere. Some amazing work with a primary school, for instance, in Mansfield.
So Edward, I mean, you know, one of my hats is working on the TMP with people who might want to become provosts and vice chancellors and top end of professional services. And I can hear them shifting uneasily in their seats going, but what about the governance of that? How on earth did you get that past council? Or what happened?
So I think originally we took the plan, which was to open a university centre in Mansfield. And we had a relatively low level ambition in terms of student numbers, because the building was all ready. It wasn't working. And we had to pay some rent. We had to appoint some staff. In fact, we had to tutor some staff across the college. Crucially, what happened was the college agreed that everything that's level 4 and above, so the business of universities, they would stop doing. And they would focus on level 3 and below, which gave us a viable number. And so we took it to the council on that basis. It was a relatively low key deal, actually. It was not a big issue for us. And in those days, remember, universities were in much more financially propitious position than they are now. So if it was now, we probably wouldn't have done it. And I could talk about the financial bit in a second if you'd like. But once we were there, all the rest of it just happened. We didn't take it through council. The fact that our outreach team was working with a primary school, which happened to be, the head teacher was the sister of a member of our staff, as it happens. That's how it happened. So it was just kind of serendipity in some cases. And it's been an amazing project. It's now got funded significantly by through the Towns Fund in Mansfield. It was just people doing what they did. There was no need to take it to council because, well, it's just what the institution does when it has a campus. We do these things around the campus.
Yeah. But I think one of the things that maybe this process has encouraged is to allow people to get on and do things, because my experience of universities in general is that universities are places of words predominantly. And oh my goodness, words can sometimes get in the way. You know,
Absolutely.
everything has to be of multiple layers, and documents have to be written in approved formats and approved number of bullet points and subclauses and all the rest of it in ways that sort of those of us who are not from that environment, other than being a student, find quite odd. And so that feels quite refreshing and quite different. And I wonder how much pushback you had from people wanting to formalize it, because I think a lot of people sometimes get comfort in the paperwork, so to speak.
So we do a lot of paperwork at NTU. People say to me that we're overly paper driven in terms of our decision making process. And my view is, well, that's how you get a good decision making process, which is clear and transparent, and you understand why you took a decision. So there was a very well-written paper about Mansfield that went through our executive team, went to our board of governors. It just didn't say specifically what we're going to do beyond open a university centre with these sorts of courses for this sort of student group over this period of time. In fact, we haven't done it. We haven't generated student numbers that were in the plan. But because it's such a major part of what NTU does now, no one really challenges that. We've probably, well, I won't go into numbers in detail, we've certainly invested more than we've currently got back. And at current rates of return, it might take 20 years to do it. But my view is, well, it doesn't really matter because the money's been invested. We're there, we're doing really good work. It's changing people's lives. It's enabling people to get jobs in the local economy. It's putting money back into that economy. And it's giving new role models to people who previously hadn't got a role model. So it's all good. And also, we needed a new story about NTU. One of the things we're really good at NTU is our public affairs work. Our story about sociability, I kind of got a bit tired since 2015, whereas Mansfield's given it a massive new impetus. And I think stories are really important. They have to be true, but they have to be told. Good stories need to be written, and then they need to be told well. And we're very good at telling good stories about the institution. And Mansfield's a brilliant story. There are now people working in the local hospital who never thought they'd be nurses, looking after their neighbours and fellow citizens, getting a really good wage, which they're spending in the local community, local economy, and their kids can see there's an ambition to be a professional in the family. I mean, that's just what it, for me, is what it's all about. And all of the people at NTU who are here and understand the strategy just get that.
Yeah. Yeah, and can I just say the story also that I really remember and you've heard this before, Edward, but when we were first involved in the strategy work initially, I remember facilitating something, maybe Chris and I were doing it together, I don't remember, with a small group, and what became really clear was it was one of a series of these focus groups we were doing, was that people had ideas, but there wasn't much of a sense of confidence around the university. People were perfectly competent, but there wasn't a sense of institutional confidence. And I think really that sense of we're not the other university that's down the road, we're the ex-Poly that's ex-Trent Poly. It came through really strongly, that because I remember somebody told the story about it. Well, of course, the bus stop down the road, it's the Trent bus stop. But of course, we try not to talk about that because we're not a Poly anymore, we're a university. And I contrast it with then, certainly by the time the second strategy started, and I think it's only grown stronger, is that, oh, actually, we're Nottingham Trent. And obviously there had been external recognition and this type of thing, such that very few years ago, I was talking to a friend whose son was at NTU, and she said, he's having a great time at Trent. And I said, oh, you called it Trent. And I was really surprised. And she said, oh yeah, that's what all the students call it. And so for me, that was a complete 10-year move from, we don't want to refer to Trent because that's us as next Polytechnic, and we're sort of, we're kind of not up with the big boys, or however it was perceived, through to, oh, students call it Trent because that's our hashtag.
I think that's right. And as I said at the start, confidence is one of the issues for me. And so winning all the awards was all about giving people that sense of confidence, external validation. And much of the work around public affairs was, if you see the university being talked about on television, radio, in the other media, people just feel proud. We have a brilliant press office too, gets all our stories into all sorts of media in all sorts of ways. They're very creative. And people just get a sense of something really happening here that is being respected and reflected by external folk. And that's what the institution needed. So no, now it doesn't think about its roots. It just thinks about what it is now and what it'll be in the future.
Yeah.
And if we do talk about our roots, Chris, we go back to 1843. And the other story we tell is that we are the oldest continually established adult education institute in the East Midlands. Now, you have to use all those words for it to be true, but we're older than the University of Nottingham. We are older than Loughborough. I won't go and repeat them all. So something about taking a very long view. Our founding college is 1843. And the story is we're doing the same things now about skills innovation as we're doing in 1843, just on a much bigger scale. So if we do tell a history, we tell a much longer history. We never talk about 1992 and transfer it from Polytechnic to university. We go right back to founding college.
Yeah. Well, there's something brilliant about that. And I mean, I don't know if it's, it's making me think of, well, first of all, I'm thinking of Asa Briggs and Victorian cities, but I'm also thinking of the, Joseph Chamberlain and civic gospel. And there's a lot of that in the founding, isn't there?
There is. Yeah, absolutely. So we didn't have the same sort of leadership as Birmingham had to the Chamberlains, but no, we had the same sort of civic pride. This was a booming city in the 19th century, and to some extent still is. But you can see all the history of that in the buildings, that many of which NTU has. And one of the great things about, of course, is that the University of Nottingham College it was, left us to go up the road. And they left us the Victorian University buildings. So if you go to Leeds, you'll see the Arkwright building, but it's not the University of Nottingham's, it's NTU's. And there's something about that being in the centre of the city and having that architecture, which again speaks to tradition and permanence, which I just think people undervalue. We got hold of an old Methodist chapel and turned it into the venue that we use for our graduation ceremonies. It's like Senate House in Cambridge, only nicer. And there's something about that, about just creating that sense of tradition or honouring it and developing it and telling it, which is really important, I think, to people feeling a sense of belonging.
That's
Students
brilliant.
and colleagues, actually.
I mean, that's brilliant. And on a later episode of this, we're going to be working with, we're going to be talking to Stephen Gould, who's managing director of Everard's, and worked with him for years. And of course, Everard's is another story of hundreds of years of heritage who've kept the heritage and innovated around a big social purpose. And I can see lots of parallels between the story you're telling, the story they tell, and it's a damn good story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we finish, and it's we're coming up to the 40 minutes, but I just want to say, first of all, great story. But there's one story that we've not paid any attention to, which is, although I was part of this work, there was a core to the work, which was the relationship between Philippa and yourself as a consulting pair. That was really important. I wonder if the two of you want to say something about that, because it did play a central role here.
You go first, Edward.
So part of the
then I get right of reply.
Yeah, part of the challenge that I faced in doing this, of course, is I have a theoretical academic background in organisation development and organisational leadership. I've written books about it, at both. So I knew how to do this, but I couldn't do it. So I had to find people, you, Chris, lastly more Philippa, who I thought knew what I was getting at, wouldn't do it the way that I would do it, but whose way of doing it I completely respected. And when I tried to interfere, would tell me to get lost in the nicest possible way and to trust their professional expertise and experience. And Philippa is very good at doing that, very elegantly. But she is just a very experienced and expert practitioner who understands what this was about, was prepared to roll with it, even when sometimes the work quite short was what would happen next. And that's okay, that's part of the fun. Because it has to be fun, I think, for people. They have to enjoy it. And that's why it worked, I think. Yeah.
And I think, from my point of view, and of course, Chris, you were very involved, and you're right, Edward, latterly, it was more me. I think one of the things that is really important in the client-consultant relationship, at the kind of, if you like, at the person leading, at the person who is the ultimate client, you, in this case, often you need to go to them, especially if you're doing something that for the organisation is different, it's a new experience. That person needs to be prepared to provide air cover for things that where the institution or the organisation is getting either jittery or people are going, no, don't want to, including potentially, and I'm not saying I particularly experienced this at NTU, but there were odd occasions where people sort of going, no, I don't want to, or no, I can't meet that time limit, or something like that. Where actually, and I do remember coming to you a couple of times saying, we're going to do this, we're speaking to this person about that, try and move this thing, whatever, unblock it, what it was, but we need you to provide air cover. We might need to come, we're telling you what's happening, don't need you to do anything just now, but I need to know that you're going to step in if requested. And you were brilliant at doing that. And I think the other thing was that we could use your name also sometimes to move things forward. But I think the other thing is that we did have fun, and I think there were also some quite robust conversations at times. And ultimately, the client always has the right to say no to something or to disagree and take a different course of action. That's the consultant can never do that. But actually, I don't think Chris or I ever felt that we couldn't have the conversation.
I hope I normally defer to your expertise, because I haven't done this sort of work for a while. You're much more skilled in it than I am. So I hope I was sufficiently deferential once I'd made my point and you said, no, this is going to work. I said, okay, if you say it's going to work, experience suggests to me that you know what you're doing. So it's going to work. And
there were times I do remember saying, you said no about something, and I do remember saying, well, I think you're wrong, but I it's your call to make.
Yeah.
So I think respect has to be at the heart of it, and also trust, because if that works, then to be honest, you can go all sorts of places and you can have all sorts of, sometimes difficult conversations, but
yeah,
they're going to be productive because it's in service of getting to moving something along and getting to a better place.
Yeah.
And I think the two of you did a great job between you in making that work. I mean, it was just brilliant to watch. Final thing, Edward, what does it feel like to be moving on from this role? Because it's been a while. You've been Vice Chancellor a while.
11 years.
Yeah.
Well, this is very Nottingham Trent. So it was planned in 2022 that I would leave in 2025. And it's the culmination of a number of moves. So we changed our chair of governors because he was time expired. We got a new chair of governors. We changed our deputy vice chancellor because she wanted to go before I went. And then after the chair of governors had a couple of years, they've now appointed my successors. They kind of know what they're looking for. So I've had a long time to acclimatise to it, but also I committed to it. And honestly, if I hadn't committed to it 3 years ago, I might have wobbled last autumn and go, well, no. The other thing, though, about going this summer is I knew that there was be an election, 2024, not quite as soon as it happened as it was, but anyway. And I knew there'd be roles coming up that I might fancy doing on the national scene. I applied for the Office for Students. I was absolutely thrilled to be appointed as chair. And it's going to be absolutely fascinating and challenging. And I think I can make a real difference to the sector through that role. So I'm very at peace with leaving.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's moving into a big role too. So it's an important role to be taking on. Philippa, is there anything you'd like to say by way of final words at all?
Only that I notice Edward's going to have to finish packing up his office, because that bookshelf behind him used to be filled with books, and it's now only half full. I think nobody can see behind your shoulder that there's
no. They were full of organisation development and leadership books, some of which I'm leaving on the shelf to go to our library, and I'm taking the really seminal ones with me. But it's a fairly small subset of the accretion of books I'd gathered over the years.
Yeah, no, and I think look forward to seeing the next stage. I think there are lots of expectations of you, so I'm looking forward to seeing the next bit.
Yeah, so am I actually. So am I.
Right. So let me just say a couple of words to close the episode, and I'll come back just to say a final thank you. So everybody, thank you very much for listening to this edition of About Time. It's brilliant to have spent some time with Edward Peck and Philippa Hardman talking over this 10 years of strategy work with NTU. Very grateful to both of you for being colleagues and clients over this period. And thank you so much for being on this episode today. So Edward and Philippa, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Pleasure.